Good morning, guys. It is Monday, December 9th, 2024. This Bathrobe business. I got my coffee and I got the news. So let's jump into it. There's a couple stories today I'm going to be sharing that I think have greater market implications, but honestly, it's kind of a mixed bag about what's going on in the markets overall. Let's jump into the first story. I'll just going to talk about gold and crypto. Gold is slightly up, $2,687. It's creeping back up to 2,700. It's kind of been doing that little by little, week after week, just a couple dollars at a time. Crypto is down though. So crypto fell below. Remember, it was at like 103 when we last talked last week. It's down to about 99,000. So just down a smidge. Let's jump into one of the stories from Friday. So payrolls came out. Payroll jobs report came out. They increased by jobs increased by 227,000 in November. This is from the Labor Department. This is not ADP. That is more than expected. Unemployment rate did rise to 4.2%. But overall, the job market is incredibly strong. This doesn't really come as a surprise. When I shared with you guys the ADP numbers last week, I said we're probably going to see strong numbers once the Labor Department actually announces stuff on Friday. Yeah, overall, very strong job market. The key metric I always look at is hospitality and leisure. It was actually in second position, but just barely. So, in my opinion, hospitality and leisure, obviously a luxury. So, if that's doing strong as far as job hiring, then that means that overall the economy is strong as well. Most of the job gains came from healthcare at about 54,000, but hospitality and leisure were a close second at about 53,000. And amazingly, government sector was 33,000 was the next greatest one. I'm surprised it wasn't construction or something like that. So overall, economy is strong, even though we're seeing a slight increase in unemployment. We went from 4.1 to 4.2. It's still at an all-time low. Now, this is also going to mean probably that the Fed is going to be cutting rates here again in December, which, as you know, in my opinion, is not a good idea. There is also this week two numbers that are going to be coming out. So we're going to be getting both CPI numbers and PPI numbers. And we'll see what those have to show. Current Wall Street consensus is CPI to be about 2.7%. And what's PPI? It doesn't actually talk about PPI here, but they're expecting about 2.7% annual increase in inflation. We'll see what that has to do. The Fed rate meeting is actually next week, so it's the 18th, next Wednesday. Everybody's anticipating that there is going to be a cut. I mean, there would have to be some major spike in inflation for them not to cut. But as we've seen, regardless of what the data is showing, they're in a cutting market. So regardless of what's coming out as far as data, you know my opinion, I think inflation is much higher than reported. There is no need to be cutting interest rates. We should have been raising interest rates this whole time, but that's not what's going to be happening. I think it's always funny when I hear people say, well, Trump might fire Jerome Powell. It's like, well, why? He's doing exactly what Trump wants. Trump wants lower interest rates, and that's going to be happening one way or another. Speaking of Trump, let's talk about tariffs. So another story talking about how Trump is going to make tariffs a primary push for his administration. President-elect Trump reiterated his promise to impose tariffs and increase oil production, even if it impacts consumers. In regards also to oil consumption, he is planning to ramp up oil production and LNG, liquefied natural gas, including more exports of liquefied natural gas. Now, honestly, most of the natural gas we produce ends up overseas because our infrastructure grid just isn't built for it. We're still built on a little bit of coal, but mostly oil. I don't know what that was. So we're still built on mostly coal and oil. LNG mostly goes overseas, especially after Ukraine. Most of Europe, especially Germany, is using our liquefied natural gas. Now, you probably noticed the drop of prices at the pumps because of this. Obviously, a lot of this market is based off of futures. And because Trump has vowed to be more, pro-oil, oil prices have been falling across the board. Now, in regards to tariffs, he kind of reiterated what we've already been talked about. Trump reiterated a commitment to drill, baby, drill, a familiar refrain from his term refraining to expand domestic drilling. He also talked about China, estimating that 60% of China could cost average. The National Retail Federation estimated that 60% of tariffs on China could cost the average American up to $624 a year. Trump is adamant, though, that this is going to be increasing income for the United States through more production domestically. So we'll see what happens with that. It is seeming more and more that it is not just something that he's using for leverage. It is going to be a primary factor of his economic policy. Next story I'm going to talk about is I'm going to talk about a good trade because I've told you guys I will report to you guys anytime I see an opportunity for a good trade. But I want to talk real briefly about Macy's. So as we know, Macy's, I've talked about that on this channel, has been struggling a lot. Retail is doing fantastically well this quarter, really for the last 2 quarters. Macy's has not been doing well. They were almost bought out with an activist investor hostile takeover last year, beginning of last year, early this year, by Arc House. Now there's another company, Barrington, that is doing the same thing. In this time, I think they're much better positioned to do it than Arc House was, just seeing as how bad Macy's is doing. So they're saying to separate Macy's real estate from their retail and then essentially sell off the real estate. I think that there's a good chance that this could happen. If this does happen one way or another, I think this signals the end of Macy's. So it's kind of tragic to see a retailer that is core to America's culture going. But I think if they don't turn it around within the next quarter, it is very likely that Macy's within the next 5 to 10 years will be non-existent, because I feel like now there's more urge to move forward with separating the real estate from the retail assets. And once that happens, it's just a matter of time until the company is sold off piece by piece. So we'll see what happens. I think there's a lot of pressure on Macy's. I do not envy the CEO that's at the helm right now. But if this does go through, Macy's is going to go the way that Sears did about a decade ago, or maybe 2 decades ago at this point. Last thing I'm going to talk about is Nvidia and China. So this is the story I'm going to talk about as far as the trade. I see Nvidia as a great trade for the day, maybe the week, but China targets Nvidia for a potential breach of monopoly law. So what does that mean? So China is claiming that Nvidia violated anti-monopoly rules, really because of what the U.S. did. So this is an interesting story. So in 2020, Nvidia purchased a company called Mellanox Technologies, which is technically an Israeli company, but it sells heavily into China. Well, as part of the deal, Nvidia was going to allow sale of chips into China, as well as sharing of technology with other chip manufacturers, domestic Chinese chip manufacturers, within 90 days of any new breakthroughs or innovations. Well, because the U.S. has sanctioned Nvidia not to sell into China, it violates that agreement. So now China is opening up a lawsuit in the World Trade Organization against Nvidia for this very reason. Because of that, Nvidia is actually down in the market about 2%. So they went from 142 to 139. I think this is a good trade. Whenever you have a story like this that impacts a day-to-day activity of a company, but isn't about earnings or long-term forecasts or anything like that, it's usually a good idea. Like when Google had that whole Gemini debacle earlier this year with, I don't know, DEI Nazis or whatever it was. Google had a pullback, people bought, and then it went back up. So I did this with Nvidia as well. When Nvidia, I don't remember what the story was, but earlier this year I used Nvidia as a trade because there was a bad story about Nvidia, and I purchased it, and then I sold it a couple days later for a few $100. I think I made like $700 off of that trade. So this is another one I would recommend looking at Nvidia today. I'm probably going to buy it as soon as the market opens here in the next 15-20 minutes. That's pretty much it. So those are the stories of the day. I hope you guys have a productive Monday. It's the start of a new week, and I will see you guys back here tomorrow.